A lot of people don't realize this, or maybe they don't think about it, but when you do an exercise through a full range of motion, you're limited in terms of how much weight you can use by how strong you are in your weakest position. So what this means is that the muscles involved in the lift are only under maximal tension at one very specific range of motion. And it's only going to last for about a quarter to a half of a second. So if we want to maximize our return on investment of time and effort and maximize our potential, we need to find ways that allow us to overload our muscles throughout their entirety. Because if we're limited by how strong we are in our weakest position, let's say we can lift 300 pounds through a full range of motion, but the muscles are capable of lifting 350 through a partial range or 400 through a partial range, but we're only lifting 300 through that range. We're not subjecting the muscles to a form of overload throughout their entirety because they're capable of doing more. So one of the things you might want to include in your strategy to maximize your return on investment or just maximize your potential is partial repetitions. Where you include them is completely up to you. It doesn't really matter. But the underlying purpose for doing so is to overload the muscles throughout their entirety. Because if they can handle greater loads at different ranges of motion and you don't subject them to those loads, why would they respond to the best of their ability, to the best of their capacity? They won't. So this isn't to say that you won't get good results training exclusively with full range repetitions, because you can, and it's probably the best way to train. But if you want to maximize your potential, you got to find ways to overload your muscles throughout their entirety, and you're not going to do that performing a full range motion because you're limited by how strong you are in your weakest position. So the muscles aren't under maximal tension throughout their entirety, throughout the full range. So you can include partials at the beginning of your workout, and the benefit to doing so is because you can handle more weight through a partial range of motion. When you move on to your full range repetitions, by contrast, it'll feel easier. So you might actually be able to use more weight and do the same amount of work, or use the same amount of weight you were going to use, but do more work with it, both of which will promote a positive response in their own right. Now, you don't have to do your partials at the beginning. Remember, the reason for including them in your strategy would be to overload the muscles throughout their entirety. And you could do this in a fatigue state. You could do it at the end of the workout. So what you do is you do your normal workout, and at the end, you do some partial repetitions to overload the muscles at the range in which they're capable of lifting more weight. And the benefit to that, if there was one, is that you don't have to use as much weight to promote that response. So you could do it at the beginning when you're in a fresh state, and you'll be able to lift more weight. But the more weight that you lift, the higher risk that'll be involved. It'll hurt more, depending on what you're doing, to get crushed by 400 pounds than it will by 350. So at the beginning, you might be able to handle 400 through a partial range, and at the end, you might only be able to handle 350. But you're still going to promote a positive response because you're overloading the muscles throughout their entirety, which you wouldn't normally do when performing a full range of motion. So that's something I wanted to share because a lot of people might not be thinking about that. They might not be aware of it. And if you want to maximize your potential and maximize your return on investment of time and effort, you got to find ways to overload your muscles throughout their entirety. And partial repetitions is probably one of the best ways to do that. If you like this information, feel free to share it. Click the fucking button at the bottom, subscribe to the channel. I'll keep bringing you the best information you're going to find as it relates to training to build muscle and get stronger.